On a whiteout Christmas night, I came home without warning and froze when I saw my daughter huddled on the porch, her thin blouse soaked through, lips bruised purple, empty eyes staring into the snow. Just beyond the glass, her in-laws raised their glasses, laughing around the fireplace, jingle bells blaring like mockery. I rushed in, scooped her into my arms, held her tight with shaking hands, and said only 6 words enough to silence the entire house. My name is Linda Parker, 67 years old, an American woman who has spent most of her life in martial arts, coaching taekwondo, and being a mother. I used to believe the hardest pain was the fall on the mat. It wasn't. The cold on that porch and what I saw tonight crushed my heart more than any kick I ever took. I came back to Boise, Idaho after months away, after trip to Seattle and national tournaments. I thought I'd planned the perfect surprise. Show up at my daughter's door on Christmas Eve, hug her, sit by the lit tree, share a simple mother-daughter meal. I pictured Hannah's smile, the one that used to melt away my longest days. Instead, I found her like a withered leaf in a winter wind, discarded like she had no worth. The Whitman house glowed bright. Through the window, I saw a holiday table loaded with staples. A golden roasted turkey, a bowl of cranberry salad sparkling under the lights, red wine gleaming in crystal glasses. I heard Evelyn, Hannah's mother-in-law, laughing loudly and saw Ryan, my son-in-law, in a white shirt, raising his glass with swagger. The fireplace crackled, jingle bells rang out. The house radiated holiday warmth. But outside, on that very porch, my daughter shook uncontrollably, curled in on herself like a small bird battered by a blizzard. I strode across the snow, my boots sinking deep, my heart pounding. "Hannah!" I called softly, but the wind hissing through the eaves seemed to swallow my voice. I knelt, draped my still sweaty coaching jacket from the long trip over her shoulders. She lifted her head, eyes red, blue lips forming one word, "Mom." Then she collapsed against me, her body so cold I feared her breathing might stop at any moment. I held her tight as a surge of anger rose, impossible to contain. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, raised on simple dreams of a warm home, was being treated like disposable trash. Inside, they clinked glasses, pretending her suffering didn't exist. That contrast slapped me hard, setting every cell in me on fire. I stood and lifted Hannah. She felt frail, weightless, like a gust could carry her away. I headed straight for the front door, my boots thudding on the porch planks. With every step my blood boiled, my eyes locked on the bright doorway. I didn't care how powerful they were or what they thought of me. I knew one thing: I would not let them abandon my daughter one more time. When the door swung open, I saw Evelyn with a half-finished glass of wine, lips painted a sharp red. Her eyes froze when she saw Hannah in my arms. The music still played, the chatter carried on from the table, but the air between us turned heavy. I swallowed my rage and stared into Evelyn's eyes, then looked down at Ryan stepping in behind his mother. 100 things I wanted to say pounded in my head, 1,000 words I wanted to scream, but they condensed into exactly 6. 6 I never thought I'd say on Christmas Eve. 6 that made the Whitman house go silent, jingle bells caught in their throats. No one in that living room expected me, the woman they'd always treated as an outsider, to call the truth by its name. Faces flushed with wine went rigid. Evelyn forced a syrupy smile, Ryan scowled, and others looked away to dodge my eyes. But I wasn't the soft Linda standing on the sidelines anymore. I felt my arms clamp around Hannah, her chest still trembling with thin breaths. I knew then and there the fight of my life had begun. I carried Hannah out of that bright house, each heavy step sinking into the snow. Behind us, glasses clinked, and the Whitmans' laughter swelled again, as if I'd never made their room freeze. No one followed. No explanations. No hands reached out to stop us. They let me carry my daughter away as if she were a broken object. Outside, the wind howled. so cold it felt like my own breath had turned to ice. Still, I felt Hannah's faint breaths against my neck. Her body was weightless, shivering like a winter leaf about to fall. I pulled her closer, shielding her with everything I had. Inside me, a slow fire caught hot enough to melt every sheet of ice covering Boise that Christmas Eve. A cab waited at the end of the empty street. I opened the door, settled Hannah in the back seat, wrapped another coat around her, and told the driver to take us straight to my small apartment. The whole ride I was silent, eyes fixed on her face. Her hair was a tangled mess, plastered to her clammy temples. Her eyes were shut, lashes wet. I stroked her hand, the same soft hand that used to grip mine when she learned to walk. Now it was cold, shaking, too weak to squeeze back. The driver kept sneaking looks in the rearview mirror. He must have felt the same numb outrage I did. But he stayed quiet and pressed the gas, cutting through the whiteout. Strangers fear touching another's grief. Me, I had no right to fear anymore. Questions looped through my head. How long had she endured this? How many times had they shoved her into the cold while I had no idea? I felt like a failure. My heart felt cracked. All those years I chased tournaments, coached teams, counted medals. I told myself I was setting an example for my daughter, but who wiped her tears in the dark? The cab pulled up to the old apartment building where I've lived alone for years. I helped Hannah inside and onto the small bed. I took off her shoes, unwound my scarf, tucked thick blankets around her. In the kitchen, I boiled water, made hot cocoa, and sat by her bed waiting for her to wake. The sweet smell filled the room, but Hannah didn't open her eyes. She stirred, lips trembling, whispering something I couldn't catch. I leaned close and heard a few broken words. "I'm sorry, Mom." My chest seized. My daughter cast out, broken in body and spirit, still thought she'd failed me. I held her hand to my cheek, tears burning. "No, Hannah, you are not at fault. You never were." I said it barely above a whisper, but every word felt etched into the air. When she slipped back into a fitful sleep, I stayed there, watching. Memories poured in. As a child, she tore around the Christmas tree, shoes dusted in cookie flour, mouth smeared with candy. She lit up our home on winter nights. She grew up kind, dreaming of a simple, warm household. I once believed Ryan would give her that. Now I knew that faith had been a bitter mistake. I sat up all night, the streetlights smearing across the frosted window. Anger kept rising, but I wouldn't let it explode. I buried it deep and turned it into a quiet flame. If I let it flare once, it would burn out fast. I needed to tend it, feed it until I could use it to burn down the wall the Whitmans had built. Near dawn, Hannah stirred, eyes half open, confused. "Mom, you won't leave me, will you?" she asked, voice so small it sounded afraid of itself. I bent over and held her. "No, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I won't let anyone hurt you again." Her breath shivered against my ear, like she didn't dare believe it. But I knew this was a promise I'd keep with everything I had left. When she fell asleep again, I went to the kitchen and pulled a stack of papers from an old drawer. Bank statements, years of money I'd sent to help the two of them. I organized every page, careful as if I were prepping for a championship match. I remembered the calls when her voice shook, asking for money to fix the roof or buy household necessities. I never asked questions, I just sent it. Now those meaningless papers would be evidence. Proof I had always been there, and that Hannah was never a freeloader, no matter what the Whitmans claimed. My hands trembled, but my eyes were sharp. I couldn't punch my way through this injustice like I did when I was young. This fight wasn't on a wooden floor. It was in law, in public opinion, and in spirit. I would need to be shrewd, steady. I would carry this anger in my chest, not let it carry me, and turn it into a shield for my daughter. When daylight edged through the window, Hannah slept on, face pale but a little calmer. I poured a fresh cup of cocoa, set it on the bedside table so warmth would greet her when she woke. Then I sat and closed my eyes for a moment. Never in my life had the path ahead looked so clear. I knew this Christmas wouldn't be the cozy holiday others enjoyed. For us, it was the start of a war, one I could not afford to lose. The next morning, Boise woke under a gray mist and a thick blanket of snow. I put on a long coat and wool scarf and slipped out while Hannah still slept, her face pale but more peaceful. I needed groceries and to quiet my mind. The street was quiet, only the scrape of snowplows cutting a steady rhythm. I tucked my chin into my collar and walked, when a short chirp from a police cruiser sounded down the block. A patrol car stopped at the intersection, the window rolled down, and a uniformed officer stepped out. Short brown hair, tall and solid, a decisive stride. I froze for a heartbeat and blurted, "Mark?" He turned, eyes bright beneath his cap, startled and then smiling. "Miss Parker. My God, how long has it been?" I smiled too, though it was tight with emotion. Gone was the 15-year-old kid from the Taekwondo gym, drenched in sweat with fire in his eyes. Mark Johnson was now a city cop with a radio on his shoulder and a duty belt full of gear. We stopped at the corner, snow drifting around us. Mark pulled off a glove and shook my hand, still that firm grip, I remembered. "When did you get back to Boise?" he asked, eyes warm but worried. I sighed, staring down the street. "Last night, and I wish I'd come sooner." I hadn't planned to hide anything. Maybe it was his eyes still honest, like years hadn't changed that made me let it out. I told him briefly about the scene at the Whitman house, Hannah shivering in the snow while the family partied inside. My voice rasped, my hands still felt as cold as when I carried her. Mark listened in silence, face tightening. His eyes darkened, his fist clenched at his side. When I finished, he spoke slowly. "I believe you. I've heard things about the Whitmans, but I didn't think they were this cruel." I looked at him, hurt and hope mixing in me. "What do you mean, heard things?" He glanced around and lowered his voice. "They're wealthy and connected. Ryan's father, Harold, used to be a judge. I once saw a traffic case clear evidence the Whitman boy was at fault, but the file vanished overnight. The victim had to stay quiet. Everyone in the system knows they're trouble if you cross them." A chill ran down my spine, not from the wind, but from the blunt truth. "So, if I take this to court, they'll try to shut it down?" I asked. Mark nodded, eyes steady. "They might. But Miss Parker, you're not alone. I've seen them throw their weight around too many times. If you push this, I'll testify." It was like a light flipped on in the dark. I stared at him, my former student, bowing before a match, now standing with a courage I hadn't seen in anyone else. I choked up. "Mark, my daughter is exhausted. She doesn't believe in justice anymore. But I can't stand by and watch them destroy her. If you help us, I'll owe you for life." He smiled faintly, resolve bright in his eyes. "I owe you more than you think. You taught me discipline and grit. Now it's my turn to stand with you." We stood quiet for a few seconds, church bells carrying from somewhere down the street. My hands shook not from the cold, but because, for the first time in years, I felt I had an ally. "But you need to be ready," Mark said, voice dropping. "They won't sit still. The closer you get to the truth, the harder they'll hit back." I drew a long breath and met his gaze. I walked into that house and saw them leaving my daughter to freeze on the porch. "Nothing will make me back down now." Mark nodded, then pulled a card from his pocket, his direct number printed on it. "Call me any time you need. Day or night, I'll be there." I took the card and clenched it in my palm, feeling like I was holding a new weapon. As we said goodbye, he stepped into the patrol car, but before closing the door, he looked at me, eyes firm. "Miss Parker, they think they're untouchable. But I believe this time they picked the wrong person." The car rolled away, leaving me standing on the snow-covered street, heart racing. Mark's words echoed in my head. I knew the road ahead was full of storms, but now I wasn't alone. I went back to the apartment, opened the door softly so I wouldn't wake Hannah. She was still there, breathing more evenly, her face less tense. I sat by the bed, took my daughter's hand, and whispered a promise. "You're not alone anymore, Hannah. I have an ally. And I'm getting you out of this darkness." Hannah's fingers curled slightly, as if she could feel my promise. I smiled through tears, knowing the quiet fire in me now had more fuel to burn brighter. That evening, while I was sorting old bank papers at the kitchen table, the wind hissing through the hallway door made me jump. Boise was still locked in winter, snow falling nonstop, icy patches clinging to the windows. Hannah was asleep, breathing steady, still weak, but no longer shaking like yesterday. I sat under the dim yellow light, marker in hand, highlighting each transfer, each bill. Just then, a soft noise at the door seam. I shivered, stood up, and walked over. In the hallway light, a thick envelope lay quietly on the threshold, like someone had shoved it in and fled. I opened the door and looked around. The corridor stretched on, empty, only the wind howling by the far window. Not a soul. I picked up the envelope, heart pounding. The paper was slightly damp, the bottom corner wet from melted snow. I brought it inside, sat down, and tore it open. Inside was a folded note, messy handwriting, smudged ink, but the line was clear. "Stay out of the Whitman family's business. If not, you'll end up exactly like your daughter." I went still. My hand crushed the paper without thinking. The veins at my temples throbbed. For a moment I heard my heartbeat slam against my ribs, hard and fast like a war drum. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I wouldn't let fear take the wheel. This wasn't my first threat, but it was the first aimed at my daughter with such spite. I glanced at the bedroom where Hannah slept, her small shoulders rising and falling under the blanket, thinking of all the humiliation she'd endured, and now this shadow over her lit my anger like a fuse. I crumpled the note and pitched it into the trash. The dry thud broke the kitchen silence. I wasn't scared, I was clear-headed. The threat only made me more determined. If I faltered or stayed quiet, Hannah would keep being their victim. I went back to the table, carefully gathering every document, placing them in a clear plastic folder. Bank statements with my name and Hannah's, the monthly transfers I sent. My handwritten notes, buy extra groceries, make sure you eat, or fix the roof before winter. Now they would be evidence. Proof that I was present, that I helped, and that Ryan and his family twisted everything into a burden and pinned it on Hannah. Staring at the thick folder, memories rushed in. I remembered Hannah sobbing on the phone, saying Ryan told her, "Don't waste money." I remembered sending money for a new space heater, and then she confessed Ryan took it to give his mother a gift. The more I thought, the sharper the pain, but the harder my resolve. I knew I couldn't fight alone. I picked up my phone, hesitated, then dialed James, the older attorney I'd known years ago from my Taekwondo Federation days. His rough, familiar voice came on the line. "Linda? It's been a while. What's going on?" I kept it brief, holding back my anger, though every word shook. James was quiet for a long moment, then said flatly, "I understand, but you need to know this opponent isn't simple. The Whitmans have money and connections. They'll hit back hard. I'm ready for that, James. I'm not afraid for myself. I'm afraid Hannah will collapse before justice finds her." On the other end, I heard a heavy sigh. Then he said, "I'll review the file, but you'll need more witnesses. You alone won't be enough." I immediately thought of Mark. He'd promised to stand with me. The thought calmed me. Maybe this time, I wasn't completely alone. After the call, I went to the living room and opened the window to let the cold air rush in. The chill cleared my head. I stood there, looking at the lights in other apartments, listening to the distant laughter of children. Part of me ached, thinking how Hannah once dreamed of something this simple, a home filled with a child's laughter. 4 losses and a cruel in-law family had stolen that dream. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. Tonight, in this small apartment, I chose my path. No matter how many envelopes come, I won't back down. I returned to the table, pulled out an old notebook, turned to the first page, and wrote, December 26th. The fight begins. I listed what needed to be done. 1. Gather all financial records. 2. Collect Hannah's medical files. 3. Record Hannah's statement when she is strong enough. 4. Contact Mark to confirm he'll testify. 5. Prepare for media if the case goes public. Each line appeared neat and clear, like a battle plan. I felt like the coach I used to be, the one who taught kids to never quit on the mat. The arena had changed, but the rules hadn't. Night thinned out. In the kitchen, only the wall clock ticked. I put the papers away, turned off the light, and went back to the bedroom. Hannah was still asleep, one hand outside the blanket, pale and thin. I held it gently and whispered, "Sleep, sweetheart. I'm ready." Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the city in cold white. Inside me, a fire rose stronger than ever. The next morning, Hannah woke to weak sunlight slipping through the blinds. I was already on the edge of the bed, holding her hand. She opened her eyes, glanced at me, then turned to the wall like she was afraid to meet her own mother's gaze. I stroked her back and softened my voice. "You don't have to hide from me anymore. I know." Hannah trembled, then burst into tears. All those stored-up tears soaked the pillow. She spoke in broken pieces, voice ragged. "Mom, I lost 4 babies. Every time the bleeding started, I just clutched my stomach and screamed in the bathroom. Ryan stood outside, but he never came in. And his mother, she just shook her head and said I was an embarrassment to their family. I pulled her into my arms, feeling my heart rip into pieces. "Why didn't you call me? Why did you go through this alone?" Hannah gave a twisted, tearful smile. "I did call, but you were always traveling for training, and I didn't want to bother you. I thought, maybe I was just weak, not like other women." I shook my head, tears spilling. "No, Hannah, you were never weak." "They were cruel," she went on, voice dropping to a whisper like wind through a crack. "After the 3rd miscarriage, I started feeling worthless. Ryan stopped looking at me, stopped touching me. He got cold, coming home late, leaving early. I cooked, and no one ate. Evelyn kept needling me. A woman who can't have children is like a dead tree. It hurt so much, Mom. I didn't know who to tell. Every word cut deep. I remembered late-night calls, her muffled sobs, and me telling myself it would pass. I'd lied to myself so I could sleep. I held her tighter and whispered in her ear, "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, but from now on, you won't be alone." Hannah pressed her face into my shoulder, shaking. I could smell the cheap shampoo in her hair, the scent of sadness. I wanted to take it all away, carry it for her. Some wounds only time and love can heal. When she finally calmed, I sat alone in the living room, looking at the photos on the wall. Little Hannah, golden hair, bright smile, clear blue eyes. She once raced around the taekwondo gym, cheering me on. When she was 6, she ran into my arms and shouted, "You're my superhero, Mom!" And now that superhero was a 67-year-old woman, sitting helpless before her daughter's pain. Tears streamed down my face. But in that flood of memories, I saw something new. Every time Hannah fell, she gave me strength. Each tear was a push. I could not fail. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through the stack again. Every receipt was proof of love trampled on. I remembered sending $5,000 to fix the roof money that vanished. I remembered sending $1,000 for vitamins after a miscarriage, only to learn Ryan used it to throw his sister a birthday party. I added notes to my notebook. All support funds diverted. Need bank confirmations. I closed it and looked out the window. The night was still dark, the wind still howling, but for the first time I saw clearly. Hannah's painful memories would become my weapon. I knew some would doubt us. A court might toss evidence, a lawyer might twist facts, but no one could deny my daughter's tears, and if the law turned its back, I'd turn to the public, to hearts that still felt. In that moment, I saw myself back on the mat, legs planted, eyes focused, breathing hard but steady. The difference now was simple. There was no fair referee, and the opponent didn't play by the rules. I went back to the bedroom and pulled the blanket over Hannah. She slept, cheeks still damp, eyelashes flickering. I promised myself these memories of tears would be more than sorrow. They would be why I fight to the end. The court date came faster than I expected. Boise was locked in early January, cold, wind whistling past the high windows of the county courthouse. I gripped Hannah's hand as we walked into the lobby. Her hand was ice cold and shaking, like she'd fall if I let go. I whispered, "You're not alone. I'm here." She nodded faintly, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. In that look I saw more than exhaustion. I saw quiet despair. She once shone. Now she was a shadow, trailing me in fear. Across the aisle, the Whitmans were already there. Ryan in a gray suit and tight tie, confidence oozing. He sat beside his father, Harold, calm face, cold gaze of a man used to power. Evelyn, deep red lipstick, sat straight with gloved hands glittering with rings. Abigail, Ryan's sister, leaned in to whisper, a mocking smile curling as they glanced our way. I guided Hannah to the plaintiff's row. James stood beside us, rearranging a thick file, eyes steady but shoulders taut. He leaned in and murmured, "Don't worry, I'll lay it all out. What matters is that Hannah stays calm." I nodded and squeezed my daughter's hand. She inhaled slowly and lowered her head to avoid their stares. Court began. The judge, a middle-aged man with neatly combed graying hair and a stern face, entered. He read through the formalities, voice flat and cool. James rose and started. He presented the evidence, bank statements for the money I'd sent to support Hannah, medical files for 4 miscarriages, and the doctor's depression diagnosis. He finished. Firm. This is a severe case of emotional abuse. The defendant and his family repeatedly humiliated, isolated, and neglected the plaintiff while she was in poor health, causing serious mental collapse. I looked over at Hannah. Her eyes were red, but I knew every word James said was the truth she'd lived day after day. Then it was their turn. A young attorney in a black suit with slicked hair stood up. His voice cut sharp. The plaintiff, Miss Hannah Parker, was not abused. The symptoms presented are exaggerations by someone looking to dodge responsibility. The Whitman family provided housing, care, and financial support. She contributed nothing to the household and failed in her duties as a wife. Each word dropped like a hammer. I saw Hannah's hand clench her skirt, her body curling in. I grit my teeth, holding myself back from jumping up right then. They brought a witness, Martha, the family's former housekeeper. She stepped to the stand, eyes avoiding ours. Miss Hannah often locked herself in her room all day. I did most of the cooking and cleaning. She always complained she was sick, but I never saw what illness. I shot to my feet, my voice tight with anger. "You're lying!" Hannah cooked every single meal and baked the very pies your family sat there enjoying. The judge slammed the gavel, voice firm. "Miss Parker, maintain order. If not, I'll have to ask you to leave." I drew a deep breath, shaking with fury, but I sat down. I glanced at Harold and caught the corner of his mouth lifting in a cold smile. Clearly this had been arranged. James stayed calm and moved to the audio evidence. It was the recording Mark secretly made on Christmas Eve. Evelyn's mocking, useless dead tree, Ryan's bitter voice, calling Hannah a faller prodemented faker. When the sound filled the courtroom, the room went dead silent. I saw Hannah trembling as tears streamed down her cheeks, but the other side jumped up immediately. Objection. This recording was made without consent, violating privacy. It's illegal and inadmissible. The judge frowned and struck the gavel. Objection sustained. The recording is excluded from the record. My heart dropped like a stone. I looked at James, his hand tightened on his briefcase, jaw set. The room buzzed with whispers. I glanced at the Whitman row and met Ryan's triumphant stare. He leaned back, arms crossed, with a half smile. Evelyn turned to whisper to Abigail, both of them smirking as if they'd just been freed. I felt heat rush to my face. All that evidence, all that truth, tossed aside with one dry excuse. Inadmissible. I wanted to scream, to rip off that mask of fake justice. Then I looked at Hannah. She sat still, shoulders shaking. If I lost control, she'd crumble too. I bit down hard and forced it all inside. The hearing dragged on. Their arguments and cooked-up reports twisted Hannah from victim into a freeloader. Every sentence was salt ground into a wound, but I understood this was only round one of a long fight. When day one ended, I led Hannah out. The late afternoon sky was gray, snow drifting steadily. She walked beside me, heavy steps, eyes cast down like she'd lost faith. I squeezed her shoulder and leaned in to whisper, "Don't be afraid, Hannah. Even if the court turns its back, even if they twist the truth, I won't let you fall." She looked up, eyes full of tears, like a lost child needing something to hold. For a moment I felt like her superhero again, and I swore, no matter how many cracks there are in this system, I'd find a way to drag the truth into the light. The days that followed felt like a nightmare on repeat. Every morning I walked into that courthouse, it felt like stepping into a cold arena where truth was bent and lies were fed. Hannah sat beside me, eyes hollowed, hands freezing. I held her hand tight, trying to pass her whatever warmth I had left. Judgment Day came. The courtroom was packed, the air so heavy it was hard to breathe. Ryan sat upright, smug like victory was certain. Evelyn adjusted her hair and shot me a disdainful glance. Abigail chuckled softly, whispering to her two kids behind her. Harold, the man who'd sat on the bench for decades, leaned back, cool eyes sliding over us like he was watching a show. The judge entered with a file in hand. I watched every move. He read the ruling in a flat, steady voice. The court grants the divorce of the plaintiff, Hannah Parker, from the defendant, Ryan Whitman. A small light flickered in my chest. At least my daughter was free of that nightmare marriage. I squeezed Hannah's hand and nodded, telling her to stay strong. But the next words fell like ice hammers. However, the court does not recognize the allegations of emotional abuse due to insufficient admissible evidence. Regarding asset division, given the defendant's greater financial contribution during the marriage, the majority of marital property shall be awarded to Ryan Whitman. The room went silent. I sat frozen. Not recognized and awarded to Ryan drilled into my ears, drowning out all our effort. Hannah folded into the chair, hands shaking over her face, her quiet sob ripping me apart. I couldn't hold back. I jumped up, voice breaking. "This isn't justice. Leaving my daughter outside in the snow is no evidence? Those blatant insults are not admissible?" The judge slammed the gavel, barking, "Miss Parker, be silent or I will have you removed." I stared him down, tears streaming, and forced myself to sit. My heart hammered. My chest tightened. I glanced across the aisle. Ryan leaned back with a winning grin. Evelyn took a leisurely sip of water. Abigail smirked, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Harold gave a small nod, like everything had gone exactly to plan. In that moment, I saw naked injustice. Not because evidence was lacking, but because the scales had been tipped. When the judge ended the session, people shuffled out. I stayed put, holding Hannah as she shook. Murmurs rippled around us. A few sympathetic looks, but no one came over. Ryan strolled past. He paused, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, "Told you you can't win. Now go back to your little apartment." His breath reeked of wine and made me sick. I wanted to deck him like I once could on the mat, but I knew that would only give him more to use against me. I held his gaze and dropped my voice to steel. "This fight isn't over, Ryan. You will pay for this." He shrugged and smirked, strutting off. Evelyn and Abigail followed, a cloud of heavy perfume and a snicker that cut like a blade. Hannah looked up, tears smeared across her face. She choked. "Mom, I can't do this anymore." I lost. I pulled her in, patting her back, whispering, "No, you haven't. This is a bad verdict, not the end." Her eyes were filled with despair, but for a second I saw a tiny glint, that fragile thread of hope I had to guard. Outside, Boise was grim, snow falling harder. I wrapped my scarf tighter around Hannah's neck and helped her down the steps. Through the crowd, I spotted Mark in uniform, watching us. He gave a small nod, face tense but resolute. He'd seen it all. We headed to the lot, shuffling through the knife-cold wind. Hannah leaned into me, legs like stone. I wrapped an arm around her and made a silent vow. Today's ruling might be a loss. But it's the spark that will make me rise stronger. The Whitmans think they've won, but they don't know this. Hannah Parker's mother will never quit. In the days after, our little apartment felt swallowed by darkness. Hannah sat by the window for hours, watching snow fall and melt, eyes empty like tomorrow had nothing to offer. I cooked breakfast and dinner. Sometimes she'd tap the spoon to the food and set it down. I knew that verdict had crushed the last of her faith. I hurt too, but my pain hardened into a steady anger. I stopped sleeping, sat at the kitchen table night after night, flipping through files, bills, handwritten notes. I replayed Ryan's sneer, Evelyn's contempt, Harold's satisfied smile. They thought they'd won. But once the truth hits people's hearts, no power can smother it. It started with one photo. On Judgment Day, as Ryan walked out smirking, a local reporter snapped a shot. Behind him, I was hugging Hannah while she cried. He held his head high like a victor. The paper ran it the next morning with a short, heavy headline. "The Whitmans, Who Owns Justice?" Within 24 hours, the photo was everywhere. People didn't need legal details. They saw the contrast. A weeping, broken woman and a swaggering man. Comments poured in. "If this is justice, I don't trust the system." And, "An elderly mother protecting her daughter while the abuser smiles? Disgraceful." I read every line quietly, warmth rising in my chest. Not gloating, just the feeling of 1,000 unseen hands on my shoulders whispering, "You're not alone." Local TV moved fast. A young reporter came to my apartment, sat across from me in the small kitchen, eyes bright. "Miss Parker, are you willing to share your story?" I hesitated, thinking of the threat envelope. Then I thought of Hannah and her tears. If I stayed quiet, I'd be accepting the Whitmans' cruelty as normal. I nodded. The interview aired that night. I told the Christmas Eve story, finding my daughter in the snow while her in-laws toasted by the fire. I talked about her 4 losses and the cold insults. No embellishment, the truth hurt enough to move people. At the end, I looked straight into the camera, voice shaky but firm. "If justice in the courtroom won't stand with us, I believe justice in the world will. I believe in the hearts of mothers, fathers, and anyone who's known the pain of loss." Within hours, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages came from everywhere: sympathy, encouragement, promises to share our story so others wouldn't face the same fate. I looked at Hannah. She sat quietly, eyes still puffy, but there was a tiny spark in her gaze. Mark called too, voice steady. "Miss Parker, what you did took courage. Public pressure will make them think twice. I'll stay close any time they try something shady." I thanked him, eyes blurring. I'd told my students for years, real strength is the faith behind the punch. Today I finally understood it myself. The next day, statewide outlets picked it up. Some national networks mentioned the Whitman case. Harold, once a symbol of integrity on the bench, was suddenly under a cloud of questions about abusing power. Ryan was dubbed the cold-blooded husband. Evelyn and Abigail became examples of cruelty in angry op-eds. I knew public mood could swing. But for once, we had a voice. That evening, Hannah sat beside me, fingers pinching the hem of her shirt. "Mom, do people really believe us?" I smiled and smoothed her hair. "Yes, see? Justice in a courtroom can be bought, but the justice in people's hearts can't." She dropped her head on my shoulder and cried for the first time in days without that heavy, hopeless look. These tears weren't bitter anymore. They felt like rain washing things clean, opening a way out. I looked out the window. Snow still fell outside, but I could feel spring slowly coming. I knew the fight was still long, but this time it wasn't just the two of us. We had a whole community watching, speaking up, and that was a power the Whitmans never saw coming. In the days after the story spread, our little apartment became a refuge for the two of us. Snow kept falling outside, but inside I felt the air change. Hannah didn't sit for hours at the window anymore. She started reading the articles, going through every supportive comment. Sometimes I saw her lips move, like she wanted to believe the world really was on her side. One afternoon, while I was making chicken soup in the kitchen, there was a knock. I wiped my hands and opened the door. Mark stood there in plain clothes with a big paper bag. He gave a small smile, warm but serious. "I figured you two could use a few things. I brought some fruit and a couple of cookbooks." I was touched and invited him in. Hannah was on the couch and looked surprised to see him. She ducked her head and said softly, "Hi." Mark sat across from her and set the bag on the table. He pulled items out one by one, explaining simply, "These apples have lots of vitamins, good for you." "And the cookbooks?" I remember Hannah said she likes to cook. His tone was calm, never pushy, but I saw Hannah blush a little. I slipped back into the kitchen and pretended to keep busy, giving them space. After a while, I heard quiet conversation. Hannah picked up a book, flipped a few pages, blinking. She said, I used to want to try making apple pie with cinnamon, but no one ate it, so I gave up." Mark smiled gently. "That's okay. If you make it, I'll be your first taste tester." My throat tightened. It had been so long since I'd seen a spark in Hannah's eyes, shy but hopeful. That night after Mark left, Hannah sat for a long time and then whispered, "Mom, why is he still kind to me? I have nothing left." I put a hand on her shoulder and looked into her tear-bright eyes. "You're still you, Hannah. Your worth isn't what you've lost. It's that you still have a loving heart. Good people see that." Her eyes welled up and she hugged me like a child who'd found solid ground. In the days that followed, Mark stopped by more often. Sometimes he brought warm donuts from the corner shop. Sometimes he just came for tea and to check in. He never pushed. He sat and listened, sharing small stories from patrol. Snow was thick today. I helped an older lady who slipped. Or, a little boy got lost in the supermarket. Crying for his mom, I carried him aisle to aisle. Those simple stories warmed our apartment, pushing out the heaviness. One evening, Hannah suddenly stood up from the couch, went into the kitchen, and pulled out a bag of flour. Her voice was small but steady. "Mom, I want to try making that apple cinnamon pie again." I turned and saw her hands shaking, but her eyes were determined. I smiled. "All right, I'll be your helper." We got to work. Flour dusted the counter. Cinnamon drifted in the air. Hannah fumbled a few times and spilled sugar, but she kept going, focused like she wanted to forget everything else. When the pie came out, the whole place filled with a sweet, cozy smell. Hannah set the hot pan on the table, eyes shining at what she'd made. Right then, a knock at the door. It was Mark. I smiled and let him in. Hannah flushed and slid the pie toward him. "Could you try it?" Mark took a bite and nodded. "It's really good, thank you." Hannah's shy smile nearly made me cry. I hadn't seen a smile like that in a long time, one not buried under tears and pain. That night, after Mark left, Hannah sat by the window and traced a finger across the fogged glass. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Maybe. I still have a chance to start over." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and whispered, "Not maybe, Hannah. You will. There are always hands reaching out from the dark. You just have to take one." She leaned into me without another word. But in her eyes I saw a glimmer I thought was gone for good. Faith in life. And I understood our fight wasn't over, but at least my daughter wasn't alone in the dark anymore. She had a hand to hold and a flame to light the path. In the weeks after, the public didn't quiet down. On social media, the Whitman name was everywhere, buried in heavy criticism. Photos of Ryan smirking in court were shared non-stop, turning into a symbol of cold indifference. Reporters dug deeper, pulling up the backroom ties Harold had used to shield the family. It all rushed in like a flood, ripping away the glossy mask they'd worn for years. I knew it was time to face them head-on. I couldn't just sit back and let the community speak for us. I needed to point to the truth myself. I asked James and Mark to meet at my place. We spread out the files, the paperwork, even the threat letter. James thought for a long time and finally said, "This is the right moment. Public pressure is strong. If we file an appeal with this evidence, they won't be able to squeeze us the way they did before," Mark added, voice firm. "I'll testify too. I was there on Christmas Eve." I heard and saw what they said. I won't let them deny it. I looked at those two men and felt a surge of emotion and resolve. This time, I wasn't walking in alone. On appeal day, Hannah and I entered the courthouse with a different spirit. She was still weak, but she held her head up, hair tied back, eyes not hiding anymore. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Remember, you're not just a victim. You're a living witness, and you have the right to speak." In the courtroom, the Whitmans didn't look so sure of themselves. Ryan was pale, trying to look calm but glancing around. Evelyn wore a sleek coat, but her hand on her purse trembled. Abigail stared down, afraid to look up. Only Harold kept that proud air, but I saw sweat beading on his forehead. James opened strong with financial and medical records and the threat letter. Then Mark took the stand. He laid out the whole night, from me lifting Hannah off the frozen porch to the insults echoing from the dining room. He spoke slowly and clearly, eyes straight ahead. The room went still. Each word seemed to carve itself into the silence. When it was Ryan's turn, he tried to deny it, snapping, "It's all a misunderstanding. Hannah always plays the victim to milk sympathy." This time, no one bought it. People in the gallery muttered. Some shook their heads. Camera flashes popped, catching his strained face. Evelyn tried to defend herself, but the more she spoke, the more her malice showed. Finally, the new judge, a short-haired woman with sharp eyes, spoke. Her voice was crisp, every word landing clean. "The court recognizes the plaintiff, Hannah Parker, as a victim of prolonged emotional abuse. The Whitman family used power and contempt to humiliate, isolate, and cause severe psychological harm." I held my breath and squeezed Hannah's hand. She broke down, but these were tears of release, not despair. "As for asset division," the judge continued, "the court rejects the defendant's arguments. A portion of the marital property is awarded to the plaintiff to ensure an independent, stable life. The claim for emotional damages will proceed in the next phase." Applause broke out in the gallery. Harold's face went ashen, his lips pressed tight. Ryan collapsed into his chair, hands clenched. Evelyn covered her face. Abigail stared at the floor. I turned and hugged Hannah. She sobbed into my shoulder, whispering between breaths, "Mom." They acknowledged me. "I'm not faking anymore." I held her, tears falling into her hair, joy and ache flooding together. After everything, that simple acknowledgement was our biggest win. We stepped out into winter sunlight that felt strangely bright. Reporters swarmed with cameras and mics. One asked, "Miss Parker, what would you say to people going through what your daughter did?" I lifted my head and spoke slowly. "Don't stay silent. Silence only feeds the abusers. Speak up. Go to your community. Justice can be slow, but when enough people see the truth, it won't stay buried." Applause rose again. Hannah stood beside me, wiping tears, and this time she smiled. It was small, but real. I knew this fight had cost us plenty, but the Whitmans finally paid a price. And I, a mother who thought she had nothing left, found new strength in love, in persistence, and in the kindness of strangers. After the ruling, our little apartment seemed brighter, even with Boise still under snow. Hannah no longer froze at every knock. She woke earlier, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a hot cup of tea. She still looked fragile, but the light in her eyes had returned something I thought I'd never see again. One morning, she sat at the table, spinning a silver spoon, hesitated, and looked at me. "Mom, I want to try working again. Nothing big, just something small." I paused, then smiled. "If you feel ready, I'm with you. What matters most is getting your trust back." Her eyes flickered with resolve. I knew those simple words were a big step. The next day, Mark stopped by with a small plant and set it in the middle of the kitchen table. "It's a poinsettia, a Christmas flower, but I think it's perfect for starting a new season." Hannah smiled softly and touched the bright red leaves. I watched and felt a quiet gratitude. In our darkest days, Mark showed up not loud or flashy, just offering a steady hand. That steady hand pulled my daughter back from the edge. I changed, too. From someone who only clutched files and bills, I learned to breathe slower, to make myself a cup of tea in the morning instead of rushing to the gym. I understood that to protect Hannah, I needed not just fighting strength, but gentleness as well. One afternoon, we went together to Boise's Central Square. It was late winter, but the sunlight stretched warm and golden. People gathered in clusters. Kids ran around the fountain that had been shut off for the cold. Hannah wore a thick sweater, hair tied up neatly. She walked slowly, but each step was steadier. A few people recognized us, a middle-aged. A woman came over and placed her hand over Hannah's. "I watched your interview. Sweetheart, you don't need to feel ashamed. You've been stronger than most." Hannah froze for a second, eyes welling. She nodded slightly and whispered, "Thanks." When the woman left, I saw Hannah's shoulders tremble, not from fear this time, but from emotion. That night, back at the apartment, Hannah set her hand on the window glass and watched the snow. She spoke softly, barely above a whisper, but clear. "Mom, I think I can still live a new life." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and rested my chin on her hair. "Not can, Hannah. You will live a new life, and you deserve it." In the days that followed, Hannah started looking for a part-time job at a small cafe near the square. She came home and told me the owner, a widowed woman, hugged her at their first meeting and said, "We don't just sell coffee here, we sell warmth too." My eyes stung hearing that. Maybe the world hadn't completely turned its back. One evening, Hannah brought home a cinnamon loaf from the cafe, set it on the kitchen table, and gave a shy smile. "I want you to try this. It's the first thing I've baked again without shaking." I broke off a piece, and the smell filled our little place. I chewed slowly, then nodded, eyes burning. "It's delicious, sweetheart, the best I've ever had." She laughed, the first full smile in months. In that moment, I knew we'd stepped out of the darkest stretch. As for me, even at my age, I felt reborn inside. I wasn't the mother collapsing in a courtroom, crying under an unjust verdict. I was a woman who stood up, fought, and watched her daughter slowly find the light again. That night before bed, I added to my old notebook, "Today," Hannah smiled again. Rebirth doesn't arrive in a single moment, but in small steps, in each dried tear, in every new smile. We survived, and from here, we will live. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Snow still fell outside, but inside our small apartment, spring had truly begun. That day, I stood in the small church hall near Boise's Square. On stage, Hannah and a few other women were getting ready for her first community meeting since the appeal. In the warm yellow light, I saw my child's smile, not forced anymore, but real and full, like a seedling that had made it through a brutal winter. Her eyes lit up when she talked, when she listened, when a young woman shared her own past. I knew Hannah had returned to life, no longer a lost silhouette in a snowy night. Sitting in the audience, I suddenly remembered that Christmas Eve. The wind whipping my face, the whiteout snow, my daughter curled on a stranger's porch, while behind the glass there was dazzling light, loud laughter, and clinking red wine glasses. In that moment, I thought I'd lost everything. But from that despair, I chose not to stay silent. I ran to my child, wrapped her in my arms, and I have never let go since. This journey taught me something deep. Justice in a courtroom can be bent, but justice from the human heart cannot. People can forge papers, use power to hide the truth, but no one can silence the honest voices of those who have suffered and loved. It was the empathy of the community, the thousands of comments, and the eyes of strangers that pulled us out of the dark. I found myself wondering and asking you, the one listening to my story, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep a fake peace, keep sitting through cold dinners and contemptuous looks? Or would you stand up shaking, even alone, to reclaim your voice and your dignity for yourself and the person you love? Only you can answer that. But if you've stayed with me this far, I believe you're like me. You believe truth deserves to be spoken, and kindness will find its way to where it's needed. I looked back at Hannah and saw her smiling, clapping for another woman's story. The light in her eyes was the greatest reward for the path I chose. I no longer saw myself as just an older mother fighting injustice. I felt part of something bigger, a current of people who dare to speak up, to protect, to love to the end. And now I want to speak directly to you, the one who patiently stayed with me through this long story. Thank you for listening, for giving me the chance to share, and for letting your heart touch the pain and the hope that Hannah and I have carried. If this story moved you, please leave a comment so I know we're not alone. Please like, subscribe, and watch the next videos. Your company and your sharing are the strength that lets me keep telling these stories about motherhood, resilience, and the justice we sometimes have to win with our own hands. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, I'm grateful. May each of us find our own light, just as Hannah found hers again in today's smile.